Last July, I tested over on the Tube Shooter Mag channel and website the Rycote Super Softie. It's a new generation of microphone windjammers designed to go over a shotgun microphone, and the idea is that it would replace the traditional furry windjammer, also made by Rycote. I think it's safe to say that Rycote are pretty much the industry de facto standard, world renowned. They know their stuff, and they've been making these for years. You'll have seen news crews using these, documentary crews using these, but anyway, they decided enough was enough. They wanted a new one, and they came out with this, which, as you can see, is furless, is not a cylindrical shape. It's more like a weather balloon, and it's made of this stuff they call 3D text. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I tested it against that and was rather surprised when it didn't work. But that's possibly exaggerating. It's not that it didn't work as well as the old traditional one. Now, this was a bit of a surprise because Rycote know their stuff. As I say, they've been doing windjammers practically since the invention of wind. And I had a chat with them, and eventually they discovered that they had a manufacturing fault in this particular size of the new Super Softie, which is the 18cm with the 19 to 22mm hole. And that manufacturing fault meant that it wasn't having as good a performance as it should have. Now, they have rectified that, so if you've bought one of these, you should be fine. If you think you've got one of the early ones and it isn't performing as well as you expected, Rycote are willing to have a little chat with you and see whether you have in fact got one of the Duff ones. But it's now 2015, and what Rycote have done is said, aha, we can improve on that. So they brought out this one, which is a revised version of the Super Softie. And as you can see, the shape has slightly changed. The old one looks like a weather balloon. This one, if you turn it on its side, I think is more like a zeppelin. So a slightly different shape, and this used to be the shape on just the 12cm, the short version, but now apparently it is this shape for all versions of the Super Softie. It's made of the same stuff, this 3D text, but the question still remains, does it work? So, in order to find out, I initially subjected this to the lab test. I took it to the test table, I pointed a fan at it, and I started doing all kind of measurements and so on. And then, as luck would have it, the weather turned very blustery here in Kent. So I took this, and I took this, and I went up to the top of Bluebell Hill, and I did a little test recording. Now, just to give you an idea of how blustery it was, here's a recording of a naked microphone without either of the windjammers on it, just so you can get an idea. Now, I took two identical microphones up with me, both Sennheiser ME66s. On one, I put this, on t'other, I put this. So here's what they sound like, and I will toggle between the recordings so you can compare them one to the other. Now, you might think that one of the microphones perhaps had an unfair advantage with the other windshield providing an additional wind block to it if the wind was blowing in that direction. Well, I thought of that, so I swapped them round. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, and that is that the Super Softie came off worse there, that the wind noise was louder on the Super Softie than it was on the old one. Well, I have to tell you, your ears may be deceiving you, because if you look at the meters and you look at the waveform, and in particular Sony Vegas Pro, which I use to edit, has this set of loudness meters which judge how loud a sound is in terms of your ear's acoustics rather than simply how big the waveform was when recording. And it tells us that the Super Softie was in fact quieter. The old Softie was picking up some very loud but very low frequency rumbles from the wind, whereas the new Super Softie was more acoustically transparent, so it was picking up the sound of the wind whipping around, and it really was whipping around there, whereas the old Softie was simply muffling everything. And that becomes more apparent in the next test as well, because of course it's not enough simply to reduce wind noise. You could put a microphone in a concrete bunker and it would reduce wind noise, but it wouldn't make a very good microphone. So the question is, how well can they keep out the unwanted wind noise whilst recording the sounds you want? And that's what this next test is all about. After a time, she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. After a time, she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit, returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. It was the White Rabbit, returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. Let me think, was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. Let me think, was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. Now let's just listen to that very last bit again, where the wind blew really strongly and the audio distorted. That distortion is not because the recording levels are too high. I've made sure I had the levels well off the end stop. It's actually the wind being so strong it's blowing through the windshields and directly into the microphone capsule and spoiling the recording at the microphone. But which of these two coped with it better? Listen again. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. Now let's pause for a moment and just take stock at where we are. Both the Softies do quite a good job of reducing wind noise, but the Super Softie actually manages to filter out some of the really low frequency rumbling. It also does a better job of preventing the microphone from distorting when particularly high blasts of winds try to get into the capsule, and it has overall, it seems, a cleaner, more acoustically transparent sound. But that's not the end of the story. You see, on the packaging, Rycote make this claim for the Super Softie, that it has high immunity to rain soaking, maintaining excellent acoustic transparency in almost all situations. And that's a bold choice of words. They're not just saying when it gets a little damp, they're actually saying high immunity to rain soaking. Soaking, mind you. Well, that sounds like a challenge to me, and there's only one way to test it. So I took both the old and new Softie outside, and with the help of my custom rain generating device, aka the watering can, I gave them both a good soaking. Now I was very careful to make sure that both of them got the same amount of drying out, both through wringing and shaking. Then I put them back on the microphones and had another go at reading. "I'm sure I'm not Ada," she said, "for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't go in ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she knows such a very little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I, and oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see, 4 times 5 is 12. That was not a good result for the Super Softie. It was like listening to the sound over a telephone line. It had lost all the high frequencies, and clearly this thing was still soaking up the water like a sponge. So I had a word with Rycote, who are very nice people, and they said, no, you see, really the high immunity is not so much about this working while it is totally soggy. It's more about it shrugging off the effects of having been made damp. You see, the thing with the original Softie is that once it's damp, as you dry it, you need to keep all the fur in good condition. They even supply this when you buy it new with a little brush so that you can brush your old Softie and keep the fur good, because once the fur loses its furriness, it stops being so good as a windjammer. And over time, and you'll know if you've ever seen a cameraman's furry, stop sniggering at the back, but if you have, they always look rather manky. Once one of these has been used for a couple of years, it's been out in the rain, it's picked up dirt and grime and horrid stuff, they do not look as nice as this. The fur's gone, and they just generally look a bit manky. And Rycote's point is that that's what happens to these over time, whereas the new Super Softie is resilient to water in as much as once it's dry, it's back to pristine condition, and you don't need to brush it or attend to it or anything other than let it dry, and perhaps if you're careful, poke a hairdryer up it or something, but gently do it. But that is really their point. They said to me, if you give it a really good shaking and let it drip dry for 10 minutes, it should be practically back to new condition. So I had a go at that as well. "I'm sure those are not the right words," said Alice, and her eyes filled with tears again as she went on. "I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that poky little house, and have next to no toys to play with, and oh, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use their putting their heads down and saying, 'Come up again, dear.' I shall only look up and say, 'Who am I then?' Tell me that first, and then, if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here until I'm somebody else." Now, just before I did that recording, I let each of the softies drip dry for 12.5 minutes in the sunshine. And whilst I think you'll agree there was certainly a marked improvement in the sound of the Super Softie, the old Softie still had the edge. The sound was just clearer. This one was still a little bit muffled. So the conclusion must be that if you are going out filming in the rain, and if you don't have time to dry the softies off, such as like me if you're shooting a lot of news where there just isn't time for anything, then the old Softie may still be your better bet in damp conditions. You just have to accept that every couple of years you're probably going to have to buy a new one once it gets grubby. However, if that's not the case, if you've got time to dry the kit off, or if you're filming in the dry, the Super Softie, as we've shown, does perform better, and long term it should survive better as well. So it's perhaps the better long-term investment. I hope this video was useful to you. Thank you very much for watching. If it was useful, please do click on that like button. Every like is very much appreciated. And if you're not already a subscriber to the channel, click on the subscribe button as well, and YouTube should let you know every time I upload a new video. Thanks again. Bye-bye.